What happens when one of television's most beloved hosts decides he's had enough of carefully crafted public relations answers and pushes back against one of the most controversial figures in modern royalty? What you're about to witness is the moment Graham Norton abandoned his usual charming demeanor and delivered a masterclass in unfiltered journalism that left Meghan Markle visibly shaken and the studio audience in stunned silence. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what you think really happened that night. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for every single word of this exchange because what unfolds is unlike anything you've ever seen on live television. The Graham Norton Show had always been known for its relaxed atmosphere where celebrities could promote their latest projects while sharing a few laughs over wine and witty banter. But this particular evening was different from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto that famous red sofa. The tension was palpable, and Graham Norton, usually the master of putting his guests at ease, seemed unusually focused, almost calculating in his approach. As the cameras rolled and the studio lights illuminated the set, Graham Norton leaned back in his chair, his trademark smile present, but somehow lacking its usual warmth. Meghan Markle, dressed impeccably in a navy blue blazer, sat across from him with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect, her smile practiced. So Graham began, his voice carrying that familiar Irish lilt that had charmed audiences for decades. You're here tonight to talk about your new podcast series, but I have to say there's something I've been dying to ask you, and I think our viewers deserve to hear your honest response. Meghan's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Of course, Graham. I'm always happy to answer questions. Are you though? Graham asked, his eyes narrowing slightly because I've been in this business for a very long time. And I've interviewed thousands of people, politicians, actors, musicians, royalty, and I've developed quite a keen sense for when someone is being genuine versus when they're simply reciting talking points. The studio audience, which had been buzzing with excitement moments before, fell silent. This wasn't the Graham Norton they were accustomed to seeing. Meghan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her media training clearly kicking in as she prepared. Her response, "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, Graham," she said carefully, her American accent sounding more pronounced than usual. "I've always been authentic in my interviews." Graham chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Authentic. Really? Because from where I'm sitting and from what I've observed over the past few years, it seems like you have a very carefully constructed narrative that you stick to regardless of the question being asked. That's not fair, Meghan replied, her voice rising slightly. I've been through an incredible amount of scrutiny, and I've always tried to be honest about my experiences. Have you, though? Graham pressed on, leaning forward in his chair. Because I've done my homework, Meghan, I've watched your interviews. I've read the transcripts. I've analyzed the patterns. And what I see is someone who has perfected the art of saying a lot of words without actually saying anything meaningful. The cameras captured every micro-expression on Meghan's face as she processed what was happening. This wasn't going according to plan. The cozy chat show format she had become accustomed to was being turned on its head by a host who seemed determined to strip away the layers of public relations polish. I think you're being unfair, she said, her voice wavering slightly. I've been very open about my struggles, about the challenges I've faced. Open about your struggles? Yes, Graham agreed, nodding slowly. But conveniently vague about your role in creating some of those struggles. You see, Meghan, I've been watching you for years now, and I've noticed something interesting. You have this remarkable ability to position yourself as the victim in every single narrative, regardless of the circumstances. The audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed fascinated by this unexpected turn. Meghan's carefully composed facade was beginning to crack. I don't think it's appropriate for you to characterize my experiences that way, she said, her voice becoming more strained. You don't know what it's like to be in my position, don't I? Graham asked, his tone becoming more pointed. Let me tell you something about my position, Meghan. I've been doing this show for over a decade. I've interviewed members of the royal family. I've spoken with people who have faced real persecution, real hardship, and have learned to recognize the difference between someone who has genuinely suffered and someone who has crafted their suffering into a brand. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's eyes flashed with anger, but she was clearly trying to maintain her composure. That's an incredibly hurtful thing to say, she responded, her voice now barely above a whisper. I never asked for any of this attention. I never wanted to be in the spotlight like this. Graham laughed, and this time there was genuine incredulity in his voice. You never wanted to be in the spotlight. Meghan, you were an actress. You married into the most famous family in the world. You've given multiple high-profile interviews. You've signed lucrative media deals. You've written books. You've started podcasts. Every single move you've made has been calculated to keep you in the spotlight. That's not true, Meghan protested. But her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Graham continued relentlessly. Because from my perspective, it looks like you've turned your personal grievances into a very successful career. And I have to wonder, at what point does seeking justice become exploiting tragedy? The question hit its mark. Meghan's composure finally began to crumble visibly. Her hands, which had been folded neatly in her lap, were now clenched into fists. Her breathing had become slightly labored, and there was a distinct tremor in her voice when she spoke. I think you're being incredibly unfair and frankly quite cruel, she said, her eyes beginning to glisten with unshed tears. I've tried to handle everything with grace and dignity. Grace and dignity, Graham repeated, his voice rising slightly. Is that what you call it when you publicly air private family matters? Is that what you call it when you make accusations that you know can't be properly refuted? Is that what you call it when you systematically undermine an institution that has served this country for centuries? The confrontation was building to a crescendo, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The cameramen were capturing every moment, every expression, every tear that was threatening to fall. This was television gold, but it was also deeply uncomfortable to witness. I never intended to hurt anyone, Meghan said, her voice now openly shaking. I was just trying to tell my truth. Your truth, Graham repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Not the truth, but your truth. As if truth is somehow subjective. As if facts can be molded to fit whatever narrative serves your purposes best. Graham's words about truth being subjective clearly struck a nerve. Meghan's face flushed red as she straightened in her chair, her media training wearing with her rising anger. How dare you, she said, her voice gaining strength through indignation. How dare you sit there and question my integrity when you have no idea what I've been through? You have no idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every word twisted. Actually, I do, Graham replied calmly, his tone becoming almost conversational. I'm gay, Meghan. I came out in a time when it wasn't easy. When it wasn't fashionable, when it could have ended my career. I've faced real discrimination, real prejudice. And you know what I didn't do. The comparison was brutal and unexpected. Meghan's mouth opened and closed as she struggled to find a response. The studio audience remained frozen, unsure whether to applaud or gasp. That's completely different, she finally managed. You can't compare our experiences. Can't I? Graham asked, tilting his head slightly. Because it seems to me that both of us faced challenges. Both of us had to overcome obstacles. The difference is I chose to let my work speak for itself rather than making my victimhood the centerpiece of my identity. I have never made victimhood the centerpiece of my identity. Meghan shot back, her voice rising. I've tried to use my platform to create positive change, to speak out against injustice. Positive change. Graham's eyebrows shot up. What positive change have you actually created, Meghan? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've created division, controversy, and a whole lot of headlines. But what tangible good have you actually accomplished? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to articulate a concrete answer. I've raised awareness about important issues, she said finally, her voice sounding less certain than before. Awareness, Graham repeated slowly. That's the refuge of every celebrity who wants to feel important without actually doing anything meaningful. You've raised awareness about what exactly? About how difficult it is to be a millionaire living in a mansion. About how challenging it is to have your every whim catered to by a staff of dozens. That's not fair, Meghan protested, tears now openly forming in her eyes. You're deliberately mischaracterizing everything I've said and done. Am I? Graham leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. Because of listen to your interviews, Meghan, I've heard you complain about not being able to go out for brunch with your friends. I've heard you describe royal protocol as if it were some form of torture. I've heard you compare your situation to that of people facing genuine oppression, and frankly, it's insulting. I never compared myself to people facing oppression, Meghan said, her voice wavering. Didn't you? Graham's voice was sharp now. Because I seem to remember you drawing parallels between your experience and that of people who have faced real discrimination, real hardship. And that's where you lost me, Meghan. That's where you crossed the line from sharing your story to exploiting other people's genuine suffering for your own narrative. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilled over. Meghan's perfectly applied makeup began to streak as she struggled to maintain her composure. I never meant to exploit anyone, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was just trying to be honest about my experiences. Honest. Graham's voice was relentless. Now, let's talk about honesty, shall we? Let's talk about the stories that have changed over time, the details that have been embellished, the convenient omissions. Because I've done my research, Meghan, and there are some interesting inconsistencies in your various accounts. What are you talking about? Meghan asked, though her voice suggested she knew exactly what he was referring to. I'm talking about the fact that your story seems to evolve depending on your audience, Graham explained, his tone becoming almost clinical, the details that get added, the emphasis that shifts the way certain facts get highlighted or minimized depending on what serves your narrative best. That's not true, Meghan protested. But her voice lacked conviction, isn't it? Graham pulled out a small stack of papers from beside his chair. Because I have here transcripts from several of your interviews, and I have to say the differences are quite fascinating. Would you like me to go through them? The threat was clear and Meghan's face went pale. She realized she was trapped, that Graham had come prepared for this confrontation in a way she hadn't anticipated. I don't think that's necessary, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Oh, but I think it is, Graham continued, his tone becoming more pointed. Because I think our viewers deserve to understand how carefully constructed your public persona really is. How much thought goes into every word, every gesture, every tear. Please, Meghan whispered, her composure completely shattered now. Please don't do this. Don't do what? Graham asked, his voice softening slightly, but his resolve remaining firm. Don't ask the questions that everyone else is thinking, but is too polite to voice. Don't point out the inconsistencies that everyone has noticed, but chooses to ignore. Don't challenge the narrative that you've spent so much time and energy crafting. The cameras captured every moment of Meghan's breakdown, every tear that fell, every tremor in her voice. This was no longer an interview. It was an interrogation, and everyone in the studio knew it. I'm just trying to survive, Meghan said through her tears. I'm just trying to protect my family and tell my story. Survive. Graham's voice was incredulous. Meghan, you live in a multi-million-dollar mansion. You have lucrative media deals. You have a team of publicists and lawyers and advisors. You have more resources and opportunities than most people could dream of. If this is survival, then I'd hate to see what you consider thriving. You don't understand, Meghan sobbed. You don't understand the pressure, the constant scrutiny, the way everything gets twisted. I understand perfectly, Graham replied, his voice becoming gentler but no less firm. I understand that you've created a prison of your own making, that you've painted yourself into a corner where you can only be the victim, never the victor. And I understand that you've confused being challenged with being persecuted. The words hit their mark with devastating precision. Meghan's sobs became more pronounced, her breathing more labored. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as one of the most famous women in the world crumbled before their eyes. I never wanted any of this, she whispered between sobs. I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be controversial. And yet here you are, Graham said quietly, his voice now carrying a note of something that might have been sympathy. Here you are, having built your entire post-royal life on being exactly those things. The contradiction Graham had just highlighted seemed to break something fundamental in Meghan's defenses. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed public image crumbling in real time. But rather than retreat, she seemed to find a reservoir of anger that had been building throughout the interview. You know what, Graham? She said, her voice shaking with emotion but gaining strength. You sit there in your comfortable position, judging me, analyzing me like I'm some kind of specimen. But you have no idea what it's like to be a woman of color, walking into an institution that has never welcomed people like me. There it is, Graham said quietly, leaning back in his chair. The race card. I was wondering when you'd play it. The studio audience gasped audibly. This was a line that most hosts would never dare cross, but Graham seemed determined to push through every boundary. How dare you? Meghan said, her voice rising to almost a shout. How dare you dismiss my experiences of racism as playing a card? That's exactly the kind of attitude that perpetuates the problem. Is it? Graham asked, his voice remaining calm in contrast to her escalating emotion. Or is it possible that you've weaponized your heritage to deflect from legitimate criticism? Because that's what I see happening here, Meghan. Every time someone questions your actions, your motives, your inconsistencies, you pivot to racism. It's become your shield, your get-out-of-jail-free card. That's not true, Meghan protested. But her voice was losing conviction again, isn't it? Graham continued relentlessly. Because I can think of dozens of examples where you've done exactly that, where legitimate questions about your behavior have been deflected by accusations of racism. And you know what that does? It diminishes the experiences of people who face real racism, genuine discrimination. The accusation was devastating, and Meghan seemed to recognize its power. Her tears were flowing freely now, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. I have experienced real racism, she whispered through her sobs. I have faced real discrimination. Have you? Graham's voice was gentle now, but his words were surgical in their precision. Or have you experienced the normal scrutiny that comes with marrying into the most famous family in the world? Have you experienced the criticism that any public figure faces when their actions are questioned? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've conflated being held accountable with being persecuted. Please stop, Meghan begged, her voice barely audible. Please just stop. I can't stop, Graham replied, his voice carrying a note of genuine sadness. Because this matters, Meghan. This conversation matters. The way you've conducted yourself matters. The narrative you've created matters. And the damage you've done to institutions, to relationships, to the very causes you claim to champion, that matters, too. I never meant to hurt anyone, Meghan sobbed, her entire body shaking. Now, but you did, Graham said softly. You hurt your family. You hurt the institution you married into. You hurt the relationships you could have built. And perhaps most tragically, you hurt yourself because you've trapped yourself in this narrative where you can only be the victim, never the architect of your own destiny. The words seemed to pierce through whatever remaining defenses Meghan had. She doubled over in her chair, her sobs becoming more violent, more desperate. I don't know how to stop, she whispered through her tears. I don't know how to be anything else. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had said during the entire interview, and Graham seemed to recognize it. His expression softened slightly, showing the first glimpse of the compassionate host his viewers knew and loved. That's the tragedy of it all, he said quietly. You've become so invested in this version of yourself that you've forgotten who you actually are underneath it all. You've become a prisoner of your own narrative. I'm scared, Meghan admitted, her voice childlike in its vulnerability. I'm scared that if I'm not the victim, then I'm nothing. I'm scared that if I admit I was wrong, then everything falls apart. But don't you see? Graham leaned forward, his voice becoming more gentle. That's exactly the prison I'm talking about. You've convinced yourself that your worth is tied to your suffering, that your identity is inseparable from your grievances. But that's not true, Meghan. That's never been true. Then what am I supposed to do? She asked, looking up at him with eyes that seemed genuinely lost. You start by telling the truth, Graham said simply. Not your truth, not a carefully constructed version designed to serve your purposes, but the actual truth. You start by taking responsibility for your choices, your actions, your role in creating the very situations you've spent years complaining about. I don't know if I can do that, Meghan whispered. Of course you can, Graham replied. But you have to want to. You have to be willing to step outside of this comfortable victim narrative and face the uncomfortable reality that you've played a significant role in creating your own circumstances. The studio was completely silent now, the audience hanging on every word of this extraordinary exchange. What had started as a typical celebrity interview had become something far more profound. A moment of genuine human reckoning. "I'm tired," Meghan said finally, her voice small and defeated. "I'm so tired of being angry all the time, of fighting all the time, of having to defend everything all the time." "Then stop," Graham said simply. "Just stop. Stop fighting battles that don't need to be fought. Stop creating conflicts that don't need to exist. Stop making everything about you and your grievances." "But if I do that, then what's left?" Meghan asked, her vulnerability now completely exposed. "What's left is the chance to find out who you really are," Graham replied. "What's left is the opportunity to build something positive instead of tearing things down. What's left is the possibility of genuine peace instead of manufactured drama." Meghan sat in silence for a long moment, her tears still falling, but her breathing beginning to steady. The cameras captured every moment of this extraordinary breakdown and potential breakthrough. "I don't know if I remember how to be anyone else," she said finally. "Then learn," Graham said gently. "Start small. Start with honesty. Start with taking responsibility. Start with admitting that maybe, just maybe, you've been wrong about some things." The interview had reached a point of genuine catharsis. A moment where the carefully constructed celebrity persona had been stripped away to reveal something much more human underneath. Whether this would lead to genuine change or simply become another chapter in the ongoing drama remained to be seen. As the cameras continued to roll, capturing this unprecedented moment of vulnerability, viewers around the world witnessed something they had never seen before, a completely unguarded Meghan Markle. Stripped of her talking points and forced to confront the reality of what she had become. The confrontation that had begun with Graham Norton's unexpected aggression had evolved into something far more complex. A moment of genuine human connection that transcended the usual boundaries of celebrity interviews. Whether it would mark a turning point or simply another dramatic chapter in an ongoing saga, only time would tell. What do you think about this extraordinary confrontation? Was Graham Norton right to push Meghan Markle to this breaking point? Or did he cross a line that should never be crossed in a television interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more incredible moments like this one. What would you have asked Meghan Markle if you had been in Graham Norton's position?